A forest stretches to the edge of the world. Black trees, thousands of them, rising from the mist like the bones of something ancient and forgotten. No sunlight reaches the ground here. No path, no sound, just the slow pulse of blue moss breathing across the forest floor. Deep inside that darkness, a figure moves, gray cloak, bare hands caked in dirt. She is tall, thin in the way that hunger makes you thin, walking with a limp, dragging one leg through the mud like it owes her something. Her face, young, but her eyes belong to someone much older. Someone who has been counting days by scratching marks into bark. Someone who was thrown here by the one person who was supposed to protect her. Above the canopy, the sky tears open, a ball of fire, falling fast, screaming metal. She stops, she looks up, and the forest holds its breath. The dirt tasted like death, not the dramatic kind, not the poetic kind they write about in the old songs back home. The real kind, the kind that settles on your tongue and reminds you that you are one missed meal away from becoming part of the ground. Seraphina dug her fingers into the frost-hardened soil. Her nails, once polished, once coated in crushed mineral dust that shimmered like starlight under the chandeliers of the high court, now cracked down to the quick, dirt packed beneath them like grout in old tile. She pulled a pale root from the earth, bulbous, ugly, the kind of thing she would have walked past 1,000 times in the royal gardens without a second glance. She bit into it. It tasted like chalk and rain. She chewed anyway. 'Cause you don't argue with calories in the Ashwood Basin. You just don't. You eat what the ground gives you, and you say thank you, and you keep breathing. Day 40, she had been counting, scratching little lines into the bark of a fallen ironwood tree near her sleeping hollow. 5 lines cross. 5 lines cross. 8 neat little bundles of 5. 40 days since the drop ship left her here. 40 days since her father looked down from his raised dais, his jaw set like carved marble, his eyes flat, empty. The eyes of a man who had already made peace with what he was about to do. And what he did was simple. He threw her away. The memory hit her without warning. It always did. Usually at the worst times. Usually when she was cold, or hungry, or both. The High Court of Valdres. She could still smell it, polished stone and old wood, and the faint sweetness of burning ceremonial oil. The ceiling vaulted so high that voices echoed 3 times before they died. Marble pillars lined the great hall like the ribs of some ancient beast. And at the far end, the dais, 3 steps above everyone else. Because 3 steps was enough to remind you that you were small. King Aldrich sat on the throne, her father, tall, broad, his silver-white hair pulled back tight against his skull. The Oakhaven were a striking species, tall, pale, built for heavier gravity than most, skin that absorbed minerals from sunlight. Seraphina had inherited his height, his sharp cheekbones, his stubbornness. She had not inherited his cruelty. That was learned, and he learned it the hard way. But that part comes later. The court was full that day. Generals in their pressed uniforms, guild representatives with their data slates and nervous smiles, lords and ladies draped in layered silks so heavy they needed attendants just to sit down. And Seraphina, standing at the foot of the dais, wearing the formal gown of the crown princess, silver and white, a thin circlet on her brow. She was 24 years old, and she was about to ruin her life. She just didn't know it yet. "The matter before the court," the herald announced, his voice bouncing off the marble, "concerns the mining colony of Rexus 7. Rexus 7, an asteroid belt on the fringe of Oakhaven territory. Rich in hyperdense plasma cores, the lifeblood of the fleet. Without those cores, warships moved like old men with bad knees. The colony had been petitioning the crown for months. Their radiation shielding was failing. The habitats were leaking, workers were getting sick, children were getting sick. They asked for repair funds. Her father ignored them because the colony was a corporate holding, technically private, technically not a royal problem. Technically. Seraphina hated that word. Technically. It was the word people used when they knew something was wrong but didn't want to fix it. So the miners went on strike. They stopped the shipments. And without those plasma cores, the fleet's combat readiness dropped by 30%. An act of treason. Technically. King Aldrich stood. The hall fell silent. The kind of silence that has weight to it. The kind that presses down on your shoulders. The colony of Rexus 7 has defied the crown, he said. His voice was deep, measured, like a man reading a verdict he had written days ago. They have withheld strategic resources during a time of military expansion. This is not a labor dispute. This is rebellion. He paused. Let the words sit in the air like smoke. Admiral Vorin. The admiral stepped forward. Old, scarred, a career soldier who had never disobeyed an order in his life. Prepare the orbital battery, target the colony's central habitat dome, glass it. The court didn't gasp. That was the thing that haunted Seraphina most. Nobody gasped, nobody flinched. They just stood there, silk in silence. Glass it. 30,000 people lived in that dome. Men, women, children. Miners who coughed up black dust every night and sent their wages home to families on other rocks. Kids who drew pictures of stars on metal walls and dreamed of one day seeing a real sky. And her father wanted to turn them into a cautionary tale, a reminder of who owned the sky. Seraphina felt her legs move before her brain gave permission, which was terrifying and stupid and exactly the kind of thing she could never undo. No. The word fell out of her mouth like a stone dropped into still water. Every eye in the hall turned to her. King Aldrich looked down from his 3 steps. His expression didn't change, not even a flicker, but his eyes. Something cold moved behind them, like ice shifting under a frozen lake. You speak out of turn, princess. I speak because no one else will. Silence. Heavier this time. Admiral Vorin, Seraphina continued. Her voice was steady. She didn't know how. Her hands were trembling behind her back. She clasped them together so hard her knuckles cracked. Stand down. Do not charge the orbital battery. The admiral looked at her, then at the king, then back at her. A man caught between 2 gravitational pulls. The repair funds the colony requested, Seraphina said, amount to 400 million credits. I am authorizing the transfer from my personal royal treasury, effective immediately. She had practiced this part, in her quarters, alone, whispering to the mirror at 3 in the morning. She had run the numbers herself. 400 million. It would drain nearly everything she had, every investment, every holding, every account her mother had left her. It was a reasonable price for 30,000 lives. King Aldrich descended 1 step, just 1, but it was enough to make the air in the room change, to make it harder to breathe. You countermand my order, he said, quiet, almost gentle, which was worse than shouting. In front of my court, in front of my generals. I countermand a massacre, Seraphina said. You undermine my authority. Your authority was about to murder children. And there it was, the line she couldn't uncross. The lords shifted in their silks. The guild representatives looked at their shoes. General Vorin stood perfectly still, like a man watching a building collapse in slow motion. King Aldrich stared at his daughter for a long time. 5 seconds. 10. An eternity measured in heartbeats. Then he sat back down. The funds will be transferred, he said, as if it were his idea, as if the whole confrontation had been a formality. The colony will receive its repairs. Relief flooded Seraphina's chest. Premature, foolish, because her father wasn't finished. And the Princess Seraphina, he continued, his voice carrying the same measured calm, has demonstrated a fundamental misunderstanding of power. A ruler must be iron. She is spun glass. He looked at her, and for the first time, she saw it. Not anger, not disappointment, nothing. He had already let her go. By the ancient rite of trial, the princess is hereby banished to the Ashwood Basin. The wilderness will shatter her, or it will forge her. If she survives, she may return. The court said nothing, not one person, not the tutor who had taught her history and laughed at her jokes, not the lady-in-waiting who had braided her hair since she was 6, not the admiral whose fleet she had just saved from becoming murderers. Loyalty, she learned that day, was just a transaction, and her currency had run out. They gave her nothing. Standard protocol for banishment: no supplies, no communication device, no weapon, except a young guard, maybe 20, sharp eyes, nervous hands. He was assigned to escort her to the dropship, the last hallway before the loading dock. He walked behind her, silent. Then, right before the airlock door, he pressed something into her palm. Cold, heavy, metal. A combat knife, standard military issue, the kind every soldier carried. She looked at him. His jaw was tight, his eyes locked straight ahead, as if he hadn't done anything at all. But his lips moved, barely. "Someone is waiting for you to come back." Before she could respond, the airlock opened, hands pushed her through, the door sealed, and the dropship carried her down into the dark. That was 40 days ago. Now she sat in a damp hollow beneath the roots of a fallen ironwood giant. The hollow wasn't shelter. It was a concession, a negotiation with the wind. "You give me this one corner, I'll stop complaining." The Ashwood Basin was not a forest. It was a machine designed to kill you slowly. The trees were black-barked monsters, thick as starship bulkheads, their canopy so dense that sunlight was a rumor, a theory, something other places had. The ground was a carpet of rotting needles and bioluminescent moss. The moss pulsed a weak blue, indifferent, like a heartbeat that didn't care whose body it belonged to. Seraphina's skin had turned a sickly gray. Her species needed sunlight to absorb trace minerals. Without it, she was starving on a cellular level, even when she ate. Her left ankle throbbed, a misstep on day 12, a root she didn't see, a twist, a crack that might have been bone or might have been cartilage. It healed wrong. Now it just hurt. A dull, permanent companion. She gripped the combat knife, the only thing she owned in the universe, in the dark. The cynicism crept in. It always did. She thought about the court, the sycophants who poured her wine and praised her paintings and told her she was brilliant. Not one had spoken. Not one had even met her eyes as they marched her to the airlock. She thought about her father. She thought about her mother. And that was worse, because thinking about her mother meant thinking about the day she died. And Seraphina couldn't afford that right now. Not here. Not with the chittering starting in the canopy above. She pressed her back against the cold wood, held the knife, controlled her breathing. 1, 2, 1, 2. The chittering stopped. A soft thud hit the ground. 20 yards away. Something heavy. Something hunting. Seraphina closed her eyes. 40 days, clean number to die on. And then the sky caught fire. The sonic boom hit first, a physical force. It rattled her teeth, shook dirt loose from the roof of her hollow. The sound was a prolonged tearing shriek, like the universe ripping at the seams. The canopy above lit up in violent orange. Unnatural. Wrong. Seraphina scrambled out, ignored the ankle, ignored everything. A streak of molten metal tore through the atmosphere, descending at a terrifying angle. It wasn't a meteor. It had shape, angles, wings, a ship, and it was dying. It clipped the tops of the ironwood trees, snapped trunks that had stood for centuries. The kinetic force sent shock waves through the basin. Birds she had never seen erupted from the canopy in screaming clouds. The ship slammed into the earth a mile east, carved a trench through the forest floor, buried itself in a ridge. Silence slammed back down. Then, ozone, scorched metal, burning sap. Seraphina stood frozen. Ships didn't come here. This sector was restricted. Royal hunting ground turned royal graveyard. If it was her father's men, she was dead. If it was scavengers, also dead. She looked at her knife. She looked at the faint orange glow in the distance. Warmth. That was what decided it. Not curiosity, not hope. Warmth. The simple, animal, desperate need to be near something hot. She tightened her cloak and started walking. 3 hours. 3 hours through black trees and blue moss and roots that grabbed at her boots like hands. The crash site was devastation. A massive scar gouged into the earth. Trees uprooted. Root systems pointing at the sky like broken fingers. Small fires sputtering in the damp air. At the end of the trench, the wreckage. Small. A snub fighter or a courier pod. Its hull charred black. Plating warped and peeling. No royal insignias. No elegant curves. An ugly, brutalist block of engineering. A human ship. Seraphina felt a cold knot in her stomach. Humans, the frontier myth, the cockroaches of the galaxy, stubborn, loud, entirely too willing to die for useless causes. Her father despised them. They lack elegance, he had sneered once. They solve problems by throwing meat and metal until the problem breaks. The cockpit hatch was blown wide, jettisoned manually. A body lay in the mud near the hull. Seraphina paused. Dead. She hoped so, because a dead human meant rations. A coat, survival, cold thought, cynical thought. Her father would have been proud. She drew her knife, approached carefully. The mud sucked at her boots. Male, wrapped in a heavy synthetic flight suit torn at the shoulder. A cracked helmet nearby. Face down. She nudged his boot with hers. Nothing. Her eyes scanned the wreckage. A metal container halfway out of the cockpit. She reached for it. The human groaned. Seraphina recoiled. Knife up. The man shifted, pushed himself onto one knee, grabbed his left shoulder, let out a breathless string of curses in a language that sounded like rocks grinding together. Basic English. She understood it. The royal tutors made sure of that. Damn it, the man rasped. Cheap. Piece of... He didn't finish. He spat something dark into the mud. He didn't look like a conqueror. He looked like garbage. Average height, maybe a little shorter than Seraphina, but broad, thick through the shoulders and chest in a way that suggested decades of manual labor. Not gym muscle, work muscle. His face was smeared with soot and grease. A rough, uneven beard covered his jaw. Deep lines around his eyes. Not laugh lines, squint lines. The kind you get from staring at instrument panels in bad light for 30 years. I was old, not ancient, but worn. Like a tool that had been used hard and never properly maintained. He pulled something from his chest rig. A small silver cylinder, twisted the top, jammed it into his own thigh. Autodoc, medical foam. He gasped, head thrown back, the chemicals hitting his system like voltage. He sat back against the hull, panting. Okay, muttered to himself. Gravity standard, air breathable, ship is gone. He opened his eyes, pale blue, washed out, like denim left in the sun too long. They swept the perimeter. Seraphina froze. Her gray cloak matched the bark. She controlled her breathing, became a shadow. The human sighed, patted himself down, pulled a heavy slug thrower from a side holster. Primitive. No plasma coils, no laser arrays, just a machine tube designed to throw lead at terrifying speeds. He checked the action, slapped the magazine, laid it across his lap. Then he did something insane. He pulled a flare from his pack, cracked it, and tossed it into the center of the clearing. Blinding crimson light, cutting through the canopy for miles, broadcasting his position to every predator in the basin. "Come on, then," the man said aloud, to the trees, to the dark, to whatever was listening. "Let's see who's home." Seraphina stared from the shadows, either wildly confident or severely concussed. She suspected the latter. She watched, her muscles coiled. If the fauna came, she would let them have him, then scavenge what was left. 10 minutes, the flare hissed low. The human. His name tag read Harkin, barely legible through the soot. He was prying open the metal container from the ship. A low chittering started in the trees. Seraphina recognized it. Prowler. Harkin stopped prying. His hand moved slowly to the slug thrower. He heard it. The chittering stopped. Silence. Heavier than before. A shadow detached from the canopy, dropped onto the hull. Dull click of claws on metal. The prowler. Size of a large hound. 6 double-jointed legs. A jaw that unhinged to reveal rows of serrated teeth. Skin mottled gray and black. Perfect camouflage against the ironwood. Harkin didn't turn his head. He just raised the gun and fired. The noise was absolute violence. Thunder in a bottle. The recoil jerked his arm, but the heavy round caught the prowler mid-leap. It didn't explode like plasma would have done. It just broke. Kinetic impact snapped its spine, threw it backward. A crumpled mess of limbs in the mud. Harkin lowered the gun. "One," he said. Flat. 2 more dropped from the trees. Left flank. Fast. A blur of teeth and muscle. Harkin pivoted. Fired twice. First shot missed. Took a chunk out of a tree trunk. Second caught the lead prowler in the shoulder. Spun it. Didn't kill it. The beast shrieked, metallic, high-pitched, and lunged. On him, jaws snapping toward his face. Harkin shoved the barrel into the creature's mouth, pulled the trigger. The back of its head blew apart. He shoved the dead weight off, just as the third one struck. It hit him hard, chest first, knocked him flat against the hull, claws tearing into his flight suit, searching for flesh. Harkin brought his arms up, protecting his throat, reaching for his belt knife. But the prowler pinned his arm. Seraphina watched. The arithmetic ran through her head. Cold, clean, let him die. Take the gear, his food, his fire, survive another week. But if he died, the pack would call more. The crash site would be swarming by morning. She would lose everything. A practical calculation. Not mercy. Not mercy at all. She stepped out of the shadows. No shout. No warning. 3 long strides, using the momentum of her sprint. She brought the combat knife down in a vicious 2-handed arc. The blade sank deep, junction of neck and shoulder. The prowler shrieked, whipped around, jaws snapping shut inches from her thigh. She didn't pull back. She twisted the knife, dragged it laterally through muscle and nerve. The front legs collapsed. It thrashed, threw mud into her face. She held on, pressing her weight onto the hilt, until the thrashing stopped. She stepped back, breathing hard, hands shaking, wiped the mud from her eyes. Harkin was staring at her, still pinned against the hull, hand on his own knife, half drawn. He looked at the dead beast, then up at her. He didn't look relieved. He looked calculating. For a long moment, the only sound was the dying flare, and 2 exhausted people trying to breathe. "Well," Harkin said finally, his voice like gravel in a blender. He slowly took his hand off his knife. "That's one way to introduce yourself." Seraphina didn't lower her weapon. "You are loud. You are foolish. You invited death to your doorstep." Her voice was rough, barely used in 40 days, the syllables sharp, clipped. Harkin grunted, pushed himself up, winced, rubbed his chest where the prowler had hit. Yeah, well, needed to know what the local wildlife looked like. He looked her over. You local. I am a resident of this forest. Yes. Right. He walked over to his slug thrower, picked it up, wiped it on his leg, checked the action, holstered it smoothly, deliberately showing her he wasn't going to shoot. Name's Harkin. Seraphina stayed put. Seraphina. Harkin stopped, looked over his shoulder, raised an eyebrow. Seraphina. That's a hell of a name for a swamp rat. Sounds like royalty. Princess, she corrected, the words slipping out before she could stop it. Old habits. Harkin snorted, short, sharp, genuine. Sure, and I'm the Emperor of Orion. Grab a seat, Your Highness. Unless you're planning on sticking me with that pig sticker. She looked at her knife, sheathed it. The threat was past. She walked closer, keeping 10 feet between them. Harkin popped the latch on the container, pulled out a small metallic block, twisted the top. A low blue flame erupted. Portable camp stove. You look like hell. Princess, he said, not looking up, rummaging. 2 silver foil packets. When was the last time you ate something that didn't taste like dirt? Her stomach cramped at the mention of food. I survive. That's not an answer. He tossed a packet. She caught it awkwardly. Heavy, dense. Beef stew, or, soy protein synthesized to taste vaguely like beef stew. Pull the tab. She hesitated. Humans were tricky, known for deceit, but the hunger was a physical pain now. She pulled the tab. The packet grew warm in her hands. A rich, savory smell filled the air, overpowering everything. The ozone, the dead prowler, the mud. Her mouth watered so hard it hurt. She ripped the top, tipped the paste into her mouth. No spoon, no dignity, salty, warm, heavy, the best thing she had ever tasted. She swallowed it in 3 massive gulps, scraped the sides with her thumb. When she lowered the packet, Harkin was watching, eating his own portion slowly, with a plastic spoon, no pity in his eyes, just observation. Don't eat too fast, he said. Your stomach shrank. I am fine, she said. Though a wave of nausea hit immediately, she forced it down. She looked at the dead prowlers. Why are you here? This is a restricted sector. Restricted by who? By King Aldrich of the Oak Haven. Harkin swallowed his stew. Never heard of him. He leaned back against the hull. My nav computer blew a relay mid-jump, dropped me out of transit into the gravity well of this rock. Barely got the pod out before my freighter turned into a very expensive firework. Not an invader, just unlucky. You lost your ship. Yep, and my cargo, and probably my license when the guild finds out. He sighed, tossed the empty packet into the mud, stretched his legs toward the blue flame. So, a princess living in mud. What did you do? Piss off daddy. The casual disrespect grated on her nerves. In the court, a man would lose his tongue for speaking to her that way. But they weren't in the court. They were in the mud. I disagreed with him, Seraphina said stiffly. On a matter of state. Let me guess, he wanted to kill somebody and you didn't. She blinked, looked at him sharply. How did you know that? Harkin chuckled, soft, cynical. I know warlords. Kid, they all have the same playbook. You show an ounce of mercy, they think you're broken, so they throw you away. He looked around the dark forest. Nice place to throw someone, though. Very scenic, lots of teeth. Seraphina pulled her cloak tighter. The heat from the food was fading. He said the wilderness would forge me. Harkin shook his head. The wilderness doesn't forge anything. It just kills the weak. and makes the strong mean. He reached into his pack, pulled out a thermal blanket, compact, folded tight, tossed it to her. She caught it, shockingly light. But the moment she unfolded it and wrapped it around her shoulders, a deep, radiating heat sank into her bones. She closed her eyes, let out a breath she hadn't known she was holding. 40 days of cold, and someone had just given her warmth without asking for anything. No, wait. I was going to ask for something. Everyone did. Why are you helping me? She asked. I could have let you die. But you didn't, Harkin pointed out. You jumped a 200-pound murder dog with a knife. That tells me two things. One, you're crazy. Two, you're useful. There it was. I'm stuck on a hostile rock, he continued. No comms, busted pod, bad knees. I need a guide. You need food and fire. He gestured between them. Symbiosis. Transaction. Clean. Logical. She understood transactions. I do not know how to fix a ship, she warned. I do, but I need parts. The main freighter crashed somewhere east. I saw it on descent before I punched out. If we can reach the wreckage, I can salvage a distress beacon. The deep woods. The thought made her stomach tighten. That is where the larger packs hunt. The alpha prowlers. And worse. Well, good thing I brought ammo. He turned down the flame, dimming their circle of light. Get some sleep, princess. We walk at first light. She didn't sleep. Not really. She sat by the fading blue flame, thermal blanket wrapped tight, watching Harkin, who had pulled his cracked helmet over his face and crossed his arms, asleep in minutes, or pretending to be. She studied him. 58 years old, maybe. Hard to tell with humans. They aged faster than her species, but they wore it differently. Not with fragility, with accumulation. Every line on his face was a year of something hard. His hands were what struck her most. Even in sleep, they weren't still. His fingers twitched, curled, as if reaching for tools or controls that weren't there. Working hands, hands that had built things and broken things in equal measure. She didn't trust him, but she didn't need to trust him. She needed to use him, and he needed to use her. And that was honest, more honest than anything the court had ever offered. She touched the hilt of her knife. She wasn't dead yet. For the first time in 40 days, she had a fire. Dawn was not a sunrise. It was a slow, agonizing dilution of darkness, black to bruised purple to suffocating gray. Seraphina woke to the metallic screech of tearing aluminum. She sat up instantly, knife in hand, and yards away. Harkin was ripping a panel off his ruined pod with an iron pry bar. He'd already stripped the pilot seat, stacked 3 nutrient crates by the dead stove. Morning, Your Highness. Hope you slept well on your pile of roots. You are dismantling your shelter. I'm lightening the load. He tossed the pry bar into the mud. Pod transponder is fried, completely melted. No rescue party tracking this junk. We stay here. We starve when rations run out. Or get eaten when the dogs figure out I'm out of heavy slugs. He kicked a crate open, tossed her a foil packet and a canteen. Eat, drink. We have 10 miles east through that. He pointed at the impenetrable wall of black trunks. The water tasted like iodine and recycled plastic. Purest thing she'd had in a month. 10 miles in this terrain, she said. 2 days minimum. The eastern undergrowth is thicker. Breeding ground for the burrowers. Burrowers. More teeth. Fewer eyes. They emerge from the ground. Great. I'll add it to the itinerary. He hefted his rucksack, heavy enough to snap a lesser man's spine. He just grunted and adjusted straps. Then he picked up a long, straight piece of pipe he'd salvaged from the pod's hydraulic system, tossed it to her. She caught the heavy metal rod. Confused. You're favoring your left leg, he said. Blunt. You hit it last night, But you limped when you jumped that prowler. The adrenaline wore off. Now it hurts. She gripped the cold metal. He missed nothing. Irritating. I do not require assistance. It's not assistance, princess. It's efficiency. You slow me down. We both die. Use the stick. He turned his back, started walking toward the tree line. In the royal courts. Pointing out a physical flaw in a monarch was punishable. Weakness was never acknowledged. Hidden behind layered silks and carefully constructed rumors. Here, weakness was a math problem. She leaned on the pipe. It helped. She followed him into the mist. They walked for 3 hours before Harkin spoke again. They had stopped to rest on a massive fallen log. The air was thick, heavy with the smell of damp earth and decaying fungus. Seraphina's ankle throbbed in rhythm with her heartbeat. Harkin was checking his ammunition, counting rounds with his thumb, his face unreadable. You said the colony was Rexus 7, he said. Casual, like he was asking about the weather. Seraphina looked at him. Yes. The mining colony, asteroid belt, plasma core extraction. You know it. Harkin didn't answer right away. He slid the magazine back into the slug thrower. Click. Smooth. Mechanical. I know it, he said. Something in his voice. A weight she hadn't heard before. The cynicism was still there, but underneath it, something heavy. Old. Like rust on iron. I ran cargo for the supply routes in that sector. For 15 years, Tyro Basque Guild contract, hauled food, equipment, medical supplies, every 3 months, like clockwork. He paused. My son worked there. The word landed between them. Son. Seraphina went very still. His name was Emmett, 26, structural engineer, smart kid, could fix anything. Got that from his mother. A ghost of a smile crossed Harkin's face, gone before it finished forming. He signed on with the mining crew because the pay was good and he wanted to build something. Actually build, not just haul junk between rocks like his old man. Harkin stared at the dense forest ahead, not seeing it. When the shielding started failing, Emmett was one of the first to report it, filed the requests, ran the numbers, told the company the radiation was going to cook everyone inside those habitats within 6 months if they didn't fix it. The company ignored him, Seraphina said. The company ignored everyone. Silence. The forest pressed in around them. Then your father threatened to glass the whole thing, and the galaxy held its breath, and somewhere in a fancy hall on a planet I've never seen, a princess stood up and spent her entire fortune to save 30,000 strangers. He looked at her. Emmett supervised the installation of the new shielding. He was the one who made sure it went up right, made sure it held, because that's what he did. He fixed things. Seraphina felt the ground tilt beneath her. Not physically, deeper than that. The kind of vertigo that comes when the universe suddenly draws a line between two things you thought were unrelated. The shielding worked. The colony survived because of you. Then, 6 months later, the Tyro Basque Guild decided the colony had become a political liability. Too much attention, too many reporters. So they cut the supply routes, quietly, diverted the cargo ships, claimed it was a logistics issue, scheduling conflict. His voice was flat now, clinical. Emmett called me, from the colony. The air recyclers were failing because the replacement filters never arrived. He told me the oxygen levels were dropping 2% a day. He asked me to come. Harkin closed his eyes. I was 3 systems away, running a haul I couldn't drop. Guild contract. Penalties for breach. I told him to hold on. I told him I'd be there in 2 weeks. He opened his eyes. He didn't have 2 weeks. The forest was silent. Even the insects had stopped. 93 people suffocated in Habitat Block 7 when the recyclers failed completely. Emmett was in the maintenance shaft trying to jury-rig a bypass When the oxygen dropped below survivable, they found him with a wrench in his hand. Seraphina didn't speak, couldn't speak. The last thing I said to him on that call was, "Hold on, I'm coming." And the last thing he said to me was, "Just get here. Dad, just get here." Harkin picked up a twig, snapped it in half, then in quarters. I didn't get there. He dropped the pieces into the mud. So I went to the Guild's regional headquarters, found the director's private yacht parked in the orbital dock. Beautiful ship, real mahogany interior, hand-stitched leather seats, worth more than every life on Rexus 7 combined, according to their math. What did you do? I took a plasma torch to it, melted it down to slag. Then I stole the freighter in dock, the one that crashed on this rock, and I ran. He looked at Seraphina, pale blue eyes steady. That was 10 years ago. I've been running ever since, hauling cargo under fake names, sleeping in the cockpit, drinking too much, and trying very hard not to think about a 26-year-old kid with a wrench in his hand. The silence that followed was enormous. Seraphina understood something then, with a clarity that cut through the fog of 40 days starvation and exhaustion. This man's son was alive because of her decision, and then dead because the universe didn't care about her decisions. Harkin, don't. He held up a hand. Don't say you're sorry. Don't say it wasn't your fault. Don't say any of the things people say. I've heard them all. They don't fit. She closed her mouth. Here's what I know, Harkin said. He stood up, slowly, his knees cracking like old wood. You bought him 6 months. 6 months he wouldn't have had. And in those 6 months, he fixed the shielding and saved every other person in that colony. So, he picked up his rucksack, settled it on his shoulders. I don't know what I feel about you. Princess, grateful, angry, tired, all of it, none of it. But I know this. He looked at her. You stood up for people you never met. And my boy got to finish his work because of it. That matters, even if the ending was garbage. He started walking. Seraphina sat for a moment. On that fallen log, in that gray, suffocating mist, she thought about a young man she never knew, fixing a radiation shield in an asteroid colony with her money, because she stood up in a marble hall and said no. She thought about how strange the universe was, that a single word spoken in defiance could ripple outward, through systems and years, and land here, in the mud, between two strangers who needed each other to survive. She picked up her pipe. She followed him. They walked in silence for another hour. The forest grew denser, darker. The air tasted metallic. Then Harkin spoke, without turning around. There's something else. Yes, my ship, the nav computer blowing a relay mid-jump. That doesn't happen, not on a Kessler-class freighter. Those systems have triple redundancy. Seraphina frowned. You believe it was sabotage? I know it was sabotage. I ran the diagnostics while the ship was breaking apart. Someone uploaded a kill code into the nav stack. Military grade. The kind of thing the Guild's security division uses when they want a ship to disappear. He pushed a curtain of hanging moss aside with his machete. 10 years. They let me run, and then they decided I'd run far enough. So he wasn't unlucky. He was a target. The Guild tried to kill you. The Guild succeeded in killing my ship. They just didn't count on me being stubborn enough to eject in time. He glanced back at her, that tired half-smile. Stubbornness. It's a human survival trait, right up there with opposable thumbs and bad decisions. Seraphina limped forward. Processing. A banished princess. A hunted pilot. Both thrown into the same killing ground by people who wanted them to disappear quietly. We are loose ends, she said. We are loose ends, Harkin agreed. He stopped at the edge of a clearing, looked east, into the deep dark of the basin, where the trees grew so thick you couldn't see 20 feet ahead, where the prowler packs hunted in numbers, where the freighter wreckage sat, with a beacon that could punch a signal through the atmosphere. Their only way out. So, Harkin said, ready to be the loosest ends in the galaxy. Seraphina shifted her weight onto the pipe. Her ankle screamed. Her stomach was already hungry again. Her skin was gray and her hands were shaking, and she was 24 years old and a very long way from home. Yes, she said, and they walked into the dark. The first 4 hours were a brutal, silent slog. The Ashwood Basin did not offer paths. It offered obstacles. Massive rotting logs slick with blue moss. Roots thick as ship bulkheads rising from the earth like the knuckles of something buried alive. The air grew steadily thicker, damp, heavy, smelling of wet earth and decaying fungus. Harkin took the lead, a heavy machete in his right hand, hacking through thick curtains of hanging moss, moving with a relentless mechanical rhythm. Chop, step, scan, chop, step, scan. Seraphina followed, leaning on her pipe, watching his back, watching the canopy, watching the ground. He rarely spoke, and when he did, it was only to point at something dangerous. Tripwire vine, step over. Soft ground, go left. Don't touch that, the sap burns. She noticed things about him. The way he moved, not graceful, not elegant, but efficient. Every motion stripped down to its essential purpose. No wasted energy, like a machine that had been running on minimal fuel for so long it forgot how to be extravagant. His knees were bad. She could see it now. The slight hitch in his stride every 10 steps or so. The way he paused at the top of each climb and shifted his weight. Not dramatically, not complaining, just adjusting. Two broken people, walking through a forest that wanted them dead. Poetry. By midday, the gray light barely shifted, but the temperature dropped. Harkin threw up a fist, the universal hand signal to stop. Seraphina froze. She listened. The forest was dead quiet. No chittering, no wind, no insects, nothing. Which was wrong, because silence in the ashwood meant something was waiting. Harkin crouched, hand on his slug thrower. He pointed to the ground 20 yards ahead. The forest floor was different there. The usual carpet of dead needles and blue moss gave way to a perfectly smooth stretch of dark, loamy soil. Soft, inviting, like someone had swept it clean. Burrower, Harkin whispered, glancing back. Seraphina stepped forward carefully, leaning on her pipe. She studied the edges of the smooth soil. The color was wrong, too uniform, too dark, and the border between the moss and the bare earth was too sharp, too neat. Nature didn't draw straight lines. No, she said. Worse, acid mire. Harkin frowned. Looks like mud. It is a digestive enzyme, secreted by a root colony beneath the surface. It breaks down organic matter. If you step on it, the crust breaks, you sink. Within 3 minutes, the enzymes strip the flesh from your bones. Harkin stared at the innocent-looking dirt. 3 minutes. Less if you struggle. He picked up a fallen branch, thick as his arm, tossed it into the center of the smooth soil. The branch hit. For a second, nothing. Then the soil bubbled. A hiss. Thick, acrid white smoke poured from the wood as it dissolved into blackened, bubbling sludge. 10 seconds. The branch was gone. Completely. Not even a splinter. Harkin let out a low whistle. Well, that's horrifying. He looked at her, and his eyes were different now. Not gratitude exactly. Recognition. The look of a man who just realized the person next to him might be the reason he stays alive. Good eye, princess. You would have walked right into it, she said, a hint of satisfaction in her voice. I probably would have, he admitted. No embarrassment, no defensiveness. Just a man acknowledging a fact. He studied the mire's edges, calculating the detour. This is why I brought you. Come on. Let's circle. Wide. And there it was. The shift. Subtle, but real. For 40 days, Seraphina had been nothing. A body losing weight, a mind going numb, a princess-shaped thing surviving on roots and spite. Now she was something, a guide, a pair of eyes that could read this forest, knowledge that kept them both alive. The transaction was balancing. He had the firepower and the food. She had the map inside her head. And for the first time since her father looked down from his dais and called her glass, she felt something small and unfamiliar spark in her chest. Purpose. They made camp as the gray light gave up and surrendered to pitch black. They found a natural alcove in the side of a massive rock formation. Defensible. One way in, one way out. Harkin liked that. He set up the camp stove. Blue flame low. Minimal light signature. Dinner was another foil packet. Synthetic chicken and rice. Tasted like salted cardboard. Seraphina ate every bite. The calories hit her bloodstream like a drug, warming her from the inside out. Harkin sat across the small flame, meticulously stripping his slug thrower, cleaning each component with a rag soaked in harsh solvent, his hands moving with rhythmic precision, the way a pianist runs scales or a surgeon lays out instruments. This was his meditation, she realized. This was how he kept the dark away. "Tell me about Emmett," she said. She didn't plan to say it. The words just came, like pulling a thread. Harkin's hands paused, mid-motion, the firing pin held between his thumb and forefinger. "What do you want to know?" "You said he could fix anything." "He could." Harkin resumed cleaning, but slower now. He got that from his mother, Lyra. She was an atmospheric engineer on the deep range stations. She could look at a broken air recycler and just know where the problem was, like she could hear the machine telling her what was wrong. He set the firing pin down. Emmett was the same way when he was 8. Our habitat's water purifier broke down. I called the maintenance crew. Emmett went into the utility closet with a screwdriver and had it fixed before they arrived. I found him sitting on the floor, covered in condensation, grinning like he'd just won a war. A ghost of a smile. His mother died when he was 12. Cancer. The deep range stations. The shielding was never perfect. The radiation got into her bones, took her apart slowly, over 2 years. His voice didn't change. That was the thing. It stayed level, steady. Like a man who had practiced this story so many times, the edges had been sanded smooth. But his hands told the truth. They trembled, just slightly, around the rag and the gun parts. After Lyra died, I buried myself in work, flew longer hauls, stayed away more, told myself I was providing for him, building a future. But what I was really doing was running. He looked at Seraphina across the blue flame. I was running from a 12-year-old boy who needed his father, and his father couldn't look at him without seeing his mother's face. Seraphina's throat tightened. "That's not... It's exactly what it was. Don't dress it up." He reassembled the slug thrower. Click, click, click. Each piece falling into place with mechanical certainty. When Emmett signed up for Rexus 7, I told him it was dangerous. I told him the frontier colonies were corporate meat grinders. He told me. Harkin paused. He told me he wanted to build something that mattered, something that lasted, and he looked at me with those eyes, his mother's eyes, brown, clear, and he said, "Not everyone runs, Dad." The words hung in the air like smoke. Last time I saw him in person, he was standing on the loading dock at Station Kepler, waving, 24 years old, still grinning, still covered in grease. I waved back, and I flew away. He set the gun across his knees. 2 years later, he was dead in a maintenance shaft with a wrench in his hand. And the last conversation we ever had, on the comm, I told him to hold on, and he told me to get there, and neither of us got what we asked for. Silence. The stove hissed. The moss outside pulsed its indifferent blue. "Do you know what the worst part is?" Harkin said. "Quiet now. It's not the grief, Grief fades. Eventually, it doesn't go away, but it gets smaller, easier to carry. He looked at his hands. The worst part is the last real conversation we had. Before the crisis, before the call, we argued about something stupid. I don't even remember what it was. Some repair I thought he should have done on his shuttle. Some schedule he missed. I was being, you know, a father, the annoying kind. And he hung up on me. He made a sound, not a laugh, not a sob, something in between. He hung up on me, and I never called back because I was stubborn and proud, and I figured, we'll talk next week. There's always next week. He closed his eyes. There wasn't a next week. There was a supply line that got cut, and an oxygen level that dropped, and a boy who died fixing something that shouldn't have been broken in the first place. Seraphina didn't say she was sorry. He had asked her not to, and she understood why. Sorry was a bandage on a wound that needed stitches. It covered the bleeding without fixing anything. Instead, she told him about her mother. Her name was Elara, Seraphina said, her voice quiet, almost a whisper, as if speaking too loudly would make the memory shatter. Harkin opened his eyes, looked at her, waiting. She was everything my father was not. Gentle, patient. She believed that ruling was a form of care, not control. She used to say that a crown was just a circle, and circles have no top, no bottom, only connection. Seraphina pulled the thermal blanket tighter. When I was small, she would take me to the observation deck of the palace, and we would watch the stars, and she would point to the colony lights, the little blinking dots in the dark, and she would say, each light is a life. Seraphina, never forget that they are not numbers. They are names. She paused. When I was 12, a delegation from the outer territories came to petition the court for independence. They were a small faction, mostly farmers and traders. No military threat. My father granted them an audience because my mother asked him to. She believed in dialogue, in diplomacy. The blue flame flickered. One of the delegates was not a farmer. He was a radical, a man who believed that the monarchy could only end in blood. He smuggled a plasma charge into the audience chamber, hidden in a ceremonial staff. Seraphina's jaw tightened. The explosion killed 9 people. My mother was standing closest to the delegation. She was shaking hands. Harkin said nothing. My father was 20 feet away. The blast threw him against a column, broke his arm, 3 ribs. He woke up in the medical bay with half his court dead. And his wife. She stopped, breathed. He held her body for 3 hours. They told me later he wouldn't let anyone take her. He just sat on the floor of the audience chamber, covered in dust and blood, holding her. The forest pressed in around their small circle of light. And when he finally stood up, he was a different man. She looked at Harkin, the father I grew up with, the one who told me bedtime stories, who laughed at bad jokes, who let me sit on his lap during council meetings. That man died with my mother. What replaced him was something else. Iron, Harkin said. Iron, Seraphina confirmed. He killed the radicals' entire faction, not just the leaders, everyone, families, children. He burned their settlements and salted the ground. And he stood in front of the court and said, mercy is what killed your queen. I will never be merciful again. She looked at the ground, and he wasn't. For 12 years, he ruled through fear. He crushed every dissent, every whisper, every petition that sounded even slightly like disobedience. And the court applauded, because fear works, for a while. Until it doesn't. Until it doesn't. Until a mining colony asks for help, and the only response he can imagine is annihilation, because that is all he has left. He cannot hear a request without hearing a threat. He cannot see a raised hand without seeing a bomb. She pulled her knees to her chest. I understand him, Harkin. That is the terrible thing. I understand why he became what he is. I watched my mother die. I watched the light leave his eyes. I know the exact moment the father I love was replaced by the king I fear. Understanding doesn't mean agreeing. No, it does not, but it makes the anger complicated. Harkin reached into his chest rig, pulled out the battered metal flask, took a swig, offered it to her. She took it. The liquid burned all the way down. She coughed. Harkin almost smiled. We're a pair, aren't we? A princess whose father tried to kill her, and a pilot who couldn't save his son. Seraphina handed the flask back. We are not so different. Don't insult me, princess. I don't wear a tiara. And despite everything, despite the cold and the dark and the dead, she almost laughed. They broke camp before dawn, pushed east. The terrain grew worse. The ironwood trees here were older, thicker, their trunks so massive that walking between them felt like navigating the corridors of an ancient cathedral. The canopy above was absolute. Not a single photon of light reached the floor. Harkin switched on a small headlamp mounted to his cracked helmet. The beam cut a narrow tunnel of visibility through the dark. It was around midday, or what passed for midday. When Seraphina saw it, she stopped, so suddenly that Harkin walked 3 steps past her before he realized. What? She wasn't looking at the ground. She was looking at a tree, specifically, at something carved into the bark. Harkin doubled back, raised the headlamp. Scratches, deep, deliberate, not claw marks, not animal territory markers. Letters, carved into the black bark of the ironwood with something sharp. A knife, maybe a piece of metal. 3 words, in the formal script of the Oakhaven language. Seraphina translated them in a whisper. I was here. Harkin frowned. What? Someone carved this. Someone who spoke my language. How old is it? She ran her fingers along the grooves. The bark had grown back partially, filling in the cuts with new tissue, but not completely. Several years, maybe 5, maybe more. She looked around, her eyes adjusting to the dark beyond Harkin's headlamp. And now that she knew what to look for, she saw more. A pile of stones, stacked, deliberately. 3 on top of each other near the base of a neighboring tree. A trail marker, a strip of fabric. Gray, rotting, caught on a low branch. The weave was fine, too fine for animal hide. It was cloth, court cloth. Seraphina's blood went cold. Harkin, shine the light over there. He swung the beam, following her pointed finger. The light found bones, not animal bones. They were long, slender, the proportions of the Oakhaven, scattered in the moss, partially overgrown with blue lichen, a rib cage, a femur, and near the skull, a ring, silver, tarnished black, but unmistakable, a signet ring, the kind worn by members of the High Council. Seraphina crouched, carefully. She picked up the ring, turned it in her fingers. The crest was eroded, but she could still make out the family seal. She knew this seal. Lord Veshon, she breathed. Who? Lord Veshon of the Northern Reach. He was a member of my father's High Council. He disappeared 8 years ago. The official statement said he retired to his estate, that he was unwell. She looked at the bones. He did not retire. Harkin crouched beside her, his headlamp illuminating the scattered remains. He was sent here. Yes. They searched the area, carefully, methodically, and they found more. Over the next hour, as they moved east, the evidence accumulated. A rusted blade, military issue, identical to the one Seraphina carried. More bones, at least 3 separate sets, in different states of decay. Carvings on trees, names, dates, messages to people who would never read them. A small cave, shallow, with the remains of a fire pit, and scratched into the wall above it, in shaking handwriting. Day 97, the water is bad. Fever won't break. If anyone finds this, tell my daughter I thought of her every night. No signature, no name, just a ghost speaking to the stone. Seraphina read the message 3 times, standing in the dark, Harkin's headlamp throwing her shadow long against the cave wall. He told me it was an ancient tradition, she said, her voice flat, controlled. The kind of control that means everything underneath is screaming. Banishment, a test of strength, a chance to prove yourself worthy of the crown. She turned to Harkin. There is no tradition, there is no test. This is an execution ground. He has been sending people here to die for over 10 years. How many? I don't know. But Lord Veshin was a good man. He argued for reducing the military budget. He wanted the funds redirected to healthcare in the outer colonies. She looked at the bones. And for that, my father put him in a box and dropped him into the forest to be eaten. Harkin stood very still. And you, princess, were supposed to be the latest. The words landed like a physical blow, because she had known. On some level, she had always known. Her father's words about shattering and forging sounded like a test, a challenge, a father's tough love wrapped in ancient language. But it was a coffin, dressed up as a crucible. She had never been meant to survive. Something broke inside Seraphina, in that shallow cave, with the dead man's message above her head, and the bones of her father's enemies beneath her feet. She didn't cry. That would come later. Instead, something harder formed, something with edges. Purpose had sparked in her chest the day before, when she saved Harkin from the acid mire. Now it caught fire. When I get off this rock, she said, her voice low, steady, like a blade being drawn, I am going back, and I am going to dismantle everything he built. Harkin looked at her for a long time, studying her face the way a mechanic studies an engine, looking for cracks, for weaknesses, for the part that might fail under pressure. He didn't find one. Okay, he said, simply. But first, we survive. They pushed east, faster now. The discovery in the cave had stripped away the last remnants of hesitation. There was no going back. There was no hiding. There was only forward. Late in the afternoon, the air changed again. A deep, subsonic vibration rolled through the ground. Not an earthquake. Not the settling of the terrain. Rhythmic. Boom. Pause. Boom. Pause. Heavy. Deliberate. Like a heartbeat amplified through a mountain. Harkin stopped dead. Rifle up. What is that? Seraphina felt it through her boots, through the pipe she leaned on, through her teeth. The lore speaks of deep wood titans, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Alpha predators that sleep for decades. I thought they were myths. Boom! Closer now. The trees groaned, swayed, as if something impossibly large was moving through the forest ahead of them, pushing the ironwoods aside like tall grass. A low, guttural rumble echoed through the basin. Not a roar, something deeper, older, a sound of immense territory being claimed. It vibrated in Seraphina's bones, made her fillings ache. 10 agonizing seconds. Then it faded, the heavy thuds moving further east, toward the freighter. It is heading for the wreckage, Seraphina said. The heat from the reactor leak. It must be drawn to it. Harkin lowered his rifle, his face grim. If that thing nests in the wreck, we'll never get to the beacon. Then we need to get there first. He looked at her, then at her leg, then at his own stiff knees. We need to move, now, through the night. Seraphina gripped her pipe. Then we move. They ran, or something close to it. A desperate lurching march through the darkness. Harkin's headlamp the only light in a world of black. The terrain fought them at every step. Roots rose like tripwires. The moss was slick, treacherous. Twice Seraphina went down. Hard, the pipe clattering away, her ankles shrieking. Twice Harkin hauled her up without a word, his grip on her arm firm, impersonal, the grip of a man pulling a tool off the ground. Nothing more, except, the second time, his hand lingered, just a fraction of a second, on her elbow, before he turned and kept walking. She noticed. He probably didn't think she did, but she noticed. 4 hours into the night march, Seraphina's vision blurred. At first she thought it was exhaustion, the gray edges of consciousness fraying, normal for someone running on starvation rations and 40 days of deprivation. But then the heat came, not the forest heat, not the damp warmth of the basin, internal heat, rising from somewhere deep inside her chest, spreading outward, through her limbs, into her fingertips. Fever. She stumbled, caught herself on a root. The world tilted sideways. No, not now. Her ankle, the poorly healed twist from day 12. She had been walking on it for 2 days now, putting weight on damaged tissue, driving bacteria deeper with every step. Infection. The forest tilted again. She grabbed a tree trunk. The bark was cold against her burning palm. Harkin. He turned, the headlamp blinding her. She threw up a hand. I need 1 minute. He walked back to her, shone the light away from her eyes, down at her hands, which were shaking, not from cold. He pressed the back of his hand against her forehead. The gesture was so fast, so instinctive, that neither of them registered what it meant until after it was done. His hand was calloused and rough and smelled like gun oil, and it was the first gentle touch she had felt in 41 days. You're burning up, he said. No alarm, just assessment. I can walk. I didn't ask if you could walk. I said you're burning up. He looked around. The forest offered nothing. No shelter, no alcove. Just endless black trees and blue moss and the sound of something distant and massive still moving east. There. He pointed the headlamp. 30 yards ahead, a cluster of fallen ironwoods, stacked against each other like a collapsed house of cards, creating a small cave-like gap beneath them. No, Seraphina said. We do not have time. The Titan, the beacon. Princess, if you collapse in the open, I'm carrying you, and I've got bad knees and a 50-pound pack, which means I drop you, which means we both die. I will not collapse. Your pupils are the size of dinner plates, and you're swaying like a drunk at last call. Sit down. That's not a request. She wanted to argue. The fire in her chest demanded it, but the ground was moving in ways the ground should not move, and the trees were bending, which they weren't. That was the fever. She sat. Harkin worked fast. He cleared the space beneath the fallen logs, laid the thermal blanket down, pulled his medical kit from the rucksack. It was small, tragically small, a combat medic's afterthought. Gauze, medical tape, 2 Autodoc canisters, a bottle of broad-spectrum antibiotics that were designed for human biochemistry and might not work on Oak Haven physiology at all. These might make you sick, he said, holding up the pills. I am already sick. Sicker. Give me the pills, Harkin. He gave her the pills. She dry swallowed them. The bitter chemical taste made her gag. He pulled her boot off, carefully. She hissed through her teeth. The ankle was swollen, red streaks running up her calf. Classic infection tracking. He cleaned the wound with antiseptic from his kit. She gripped the pipe so hard the metal groaned. Then he wrapped the ankle, tight, clean, the hands of a man who had done field medicine before, on himself, on crew members, on people who couldn't afford real doctors. How did you learn this? Seraphina asked, her voice thin, the fever making everything echo. 30 years on deep-range haulers. You learn to fix things, machines, people. Doesn't matter. Everything breaks eventually. He finished the wrap, pulled her boot back on loosely. Now, sleep. We don't have time. You don't have a choice. The antibiotics need 4 hours to work. If they work, If they don't, we have bigger problems. She lay back on the thermal blanket. The heat radiating up from the material fought the fever burning down from inside. Her body caught in a war between two kinds of fire. Harkin sat at the entrance of their makeshift shelter, rifle across his knees, back against the log, watching the dark, guarding her. I didn't have to. The transaction didn't require it. She was the guide. Yes, he needed her alive. Yes, but sitting watch for 4 hours, in the dark, on a hostile world. While a titan moved through the forest and prowler packs chittered in the canopy. That wasn't efficiency, that was care. Plain, simple. The kind he had buried so deep he probably didn't recognize it when it surfaced. She watched him through half-closed eyes, the fever making him blur at the edges. He looked old in the headlamp light, the lines on his face deeper, the set of his jaw tired. But his pale blue eyes, they moved constantly, scanning, alert, the eyes of a man who had been watching the dark for 10 years. Because if he stopped watching, he would have to think, and thinking led to Emmett, and Emmett led to the wrench, and the wrench led to the unanswered call, and the call led to a grief so deep it had no bottom. So he watched the dark instead, and tonight, he watched it for her. She dreamed of her mother, standing on the observation deck, stars behind her like scattered diamonds, her face gentle, her hands warm. Each light is a life, Seraphina. And then the lights went out, one by one, until the sky was black. And her mother turned to her, and her face was different, sad, tired. You can't save them all, my love, but you must never stop trying. She woke to gray light. The fever had broken. A cold sweat soaked through her cloak, but her vision was clear. The ground stayed where ground belonged. Harkin was still sitting at the entrance. Same position, rifle across his knees. He hadn't moved. Did you sleep? She asked. No. Harkin, I've done longer watches, on worse nights. Don't make it a thing. He stood up, slowly, his knees cracking like gunshots. He stretched his back with a grimace that he tried to hide and failed. How's the ankle? She tested it, stood, weight on. The pain was there, still but manageable. The swelling had reduced. The red streaks had faded. The antibiotics worked. Good. Human medicine on alien royalty. Should have been a paper. He packed the camp, fast, efficient. Tossed her a foil packet in the canteen. Eat fast. We lost 4 hours, and that thing in the forest didn't stop moving last night. They ate in silence. The nutrient paste tasted worse cold. Seraphina didn't care. Calories were calories, as they prepared to move. Harkin paused. He was adjusting his rucksack straps, not looking at her. Last night, he said, when you were out, you talked, in your sleep. Seraphina stiffened. You said mama, over and over. She didn't respond. My boy used to do that. When he was small, when he had nightmares, he'd call for his mother, even after she died. Harkin tightened the last strap. I'd go into his room, sit on the edge of the bed, and I'd hold his hand until he stopped. He finally looked at her. I haven't held anyone's hand in 10 years. I sat next to you last night and I thought about it, about reaching over and, I don't know. He shook his head. I didn't, because I'm not. That's not who I am anymore. Seraphina looked at him, this battered, cynical, stubborn old man who hadn't slept all night because a stranger had a fever. Maybe it is, she said, quiet. Maybe you just forgot. He held her gaze for 3 seconds, then looked away. Come on, princess. We're burning daylight, assuming there is any. And they walked. By late afternoon, the air changed violently, the damp, rotting smell shoved aside by the sharp metallic tang of industrial coolant and scorched wiring. Temperature rose, noticeably. We're close, Harkin whispered. They crested a sharp, muddy ridge. Below them lay a valley, and in the valley, Seraphina stopped, leaning heavily on her pipe, and stared. The freighter was not a ship. It was a flying city block. The sheer mass defied the landscape. It had carved a trench half a mile long, obliterated thousands of ironwood trees, slammed into the far wall of the valley and stopped. The hull was reinforced steel and titanium, painted dull gray, scarred by atmospheric entry. The rear thrusters were crushed, buried under tons of dirt. The front half was surprisingly intact, but the belly was ripped open, a massive gash, and from that gash, a sickly green fluid leaked. Reactor coolant, pooling into a toxic smoking lake at the base of the wreck. Harkin pulled out digital binoculars, scanned. She held together better than I thought. Cockpit sealed, cargo bays compromised. He adjusted the focus. Comms array is dead. Main antenna snapped clean off. But the engineering bay. He lowered the binoculars. Emergency distress beacon. Independent fusion battery. If I can get in there, rip it out. Trigger it manually. It'll punch a signal through the atmosphere. He handed her the binoculars. Take a look at the belly, where the hull is torn open. She pressed them to her eyes. The digital display highlighted heat signatures in pale orange. I see the gash, internal structure exposed. Catwalks, wiring. Look higher, on the port side, about 40 feet up. There's a maintenance airlock. She found it, a small rectangular opening in the hull plating. The ladder that once led to it had been ripped away in the crash, but thick power cables hung from the opening, draping down the side of the ship like vines. That's our way in, Harkin said. The belly is too dangerous, the coolant lake is toxic, and, he pointed. She shifted the binoculars down to the edge of the green lake, where the heat was strongest. Her breath caught, a mountain of black-scaled muscle, an alpha prowler, but the scale was entirely wrong. It was the size of a heavy transport tank, 6 legs thick as tree trunks, armored with calcified plating that looked like it could deflect small arms fire. Its head rested on massive front paws, eyes closed. A long barbed tail swept lazily through the mud. It's drawn to the reactor heat, Seraphina whispered. Nesting. Of course it is. Harkin sighed. Why wouldn't a giant armored death lizard build a nest in my engine room? It's just that kind of weak. She lowered the binoculars. There is something else. I don't want to hear something else. On the starboard side, about halfway up, there is a secondary hatch, smaller, partially hidden behind a section of collapsed plating. Harkin took the binoculars back, found it. Emergency escape access, mid-deck, connects to the crew quarters in the ventilation network. He paused, processing. Good eye. If the main route goes bad, that's a backup. He lowered the binoculars, looked at the Alpha, then at the cables, then at Seraphina's wrapped ankle. The climb is 40 feet, dead weight. Your ankle is held together with tape and human antibiotics. It is a calculated risk. He recognized his own logic, thrown back at him, a flicker in his eyes, almost amused. If you fall, then you leave me, and you climb alone, and you survive. That is the transaction. Harkin, you said it yourself, symbiosis. If one component fails, the other continues. He stared at her, the cynical mercenary looking at the exiled princess. She stared back, 24 years old, covered in mud, gray skin, cracked nails, fever sweat dried on her brow, leaning on a pipe like an old woman, and absolutely, completely unbroken. All right, Harkin said quietly, but for the record, I don't like the math on this one. You don't have to like it. I know. He checked his ammunition. 14 heavy slugs against the armor on that beast. pebbles. "We cannot fight it," Seraphina said. "Your gun will not penetrate the plating." "Then we're ghosts." Harkin slid the binoculars into his pack, shouldered his rifle. "We go in quiet. We go in fast. We get the beacon. We get out." The sun, whatever remained of it behind the canopy, was dropping toward the horizon. The valley below grew darker. The green glow of the coolant lake cast an eerie light against the hull of the dead freighter. Somewhere in the deep woods behind them, the Titan moved. The ground trembled, a reminder that the clock was ticking. "Tomorrow," Harkin said. "First light. We go." He set up the stove. One last time, one last foil packet, split between them. The portions getting smaller, the hunger getting louder. They ate in silence, looking down at the valley, at the ship, at the beast, and somewhere between the last bite and the falling dark. Seraphina realized she was not afraid. She had been afraid for 40 days, of the forest, of the prowlers, of dying alone in the mud, of becoming one more set of bones in her father's killing ground. But sitting here, on this ridge, with a beat-up old pilot who couldn't sleep and couldn't forgive himself and couldn't stop watching the dark for people who needed watching over. The fear was gone, replaced by something quieter, steadier, something that felt like the ground beneath a house that has weathered every storm and is still standing. Whatever waited down there, they would face it, together. Dawn did not arrive. It seeped, like blood through a bandage, the black giving way to bruised purple, then gray, then a thick, suffocating mist that clung to the valley floor like a living thing. Seraphina stood at the edge of the ridge, looking down at the freighter, at the toxic green lake, at the mountain of black muscle sleeping beside it. Her ankle throbbed, a steady beat, like a second heart she didn't want. Harkin crouched beside her, checking his slug thrower one final time. 14 rounds. He had counted them 3 times already, as if the number might change, as if the universe might slip an extra bullet into the magazine out of pity. It wouldn't. "The approach," Seraphina said. "Quiet. We circle wide from the north, use the tree line for cover until we reach the hull. The wind is coming from the east. It will carry our scent away from the Alpha." Harkin nodded. "The cables are on the port side, 40 feet up. I go first. I anchor the safety line. You climb second. And if the Alpha wakes, we move faster." "That's not a plan." "Princess, I've been winging it since I stole this freighter 10 years ago. The plan is we go, and we don't die. Everything else is improvisation." He stood, his knees cracked. He grimaced, adjusted his pack. "One more thing," he said, not looking at her, looking at the wreck. "The secondary hatch we spotted, starboard side, mid-deck, behind the collapsed plating. I remember. If things go sideways inside, if the main route gets cut off, that's the backup exit. It connects to the ventilation network, runs all the way down to the crew quarters and back up to a maintenance shaft on the starboard side." He tapped his temple. "I walked these corridors for 15 years. I know where every bolt is, or was, before gravity had its way." Seraphina memorized the route. Main airlock, down to engineering, beacon, back up, and if that failed, mid-deck hatch, ventilation, starboard shaft, out. 2 paths, 1 goal. "Ready?" Harkin asked. She gripped her pipe, her knife, the 2 things she owned in the universe. Yes. They descended into the valley. The heat hit them first. A thick, humid wave rising from the coolant lake. It smelled violently of chemicals, sweet and metallic and wrong. The kind of smell that told your body to run before your brain caught up. They approached from the north flank, staying low, using the massive uprooted trees as cover. The ground was soft here, saturated with leak coolant that had seeped into the soil. Every step made a wet sound. Too loud. Always too loud. The Alpha was 100 yards away, sleeping. its massive ribs rising and falling with a slow rhythm. Each exhale sent a puff of hot, fetid air across the mud, creating small ripples in the toxic green lake. Up close, the beast was impossible, the size of it, the sheer tonnage of muscle and calcified armor. It was a biological tank, designed by evolution to be the apex of everything. 6 legs thick as ironwood trunks, claws that could peel starship plating, a jaw that could engulf a man whole. And it was sleeping, thank the stars. It was sleeping. They reached the base of the hull, directly beneath the dangling cables. The rubber casing was thick, slick with condensation. Seraphina looked up. 40 feet of vertical climb, with a bad ankle, weakened arms, and a sleeping monster at her back. Harkin slung his rifle over his shoulder, gripped the cables, tested the weight. The cables held, barely. A groan of stressed metal from above. He looked at her one last time. If I fall, don't catch me, just run. Stop telling me to leave you behind. Stop making me worry you won't. And before she could respond, he climbed, fast, his upper body strength hauling him up the side of the ship with the efficiency of a man who had spent 30 years climbing in and out of cargo holds and cockpits. Hand over hand, boots braced against the hull, his weight making the cables sway. 10 feet, 20. The Alpha shifted in its sleep. A massive paw twitched, claws extending, then retracting, dreaming of whatever monsters dream about. 30 feet. Harkin's breathing was loud, too loud. Each exhale a ragged grunt of effort. He reached the airlock ledge, swung his legs over, disappeared inside. 3 seconds of silence, the longest 3 seconds of Seraphina's life. Then his face appeared, pale, sweating, but alive. He dropped the safety line, thin high-tensile rope. She tied it around her waist, tight, double-knotted, the way Harkin had shown her the first night. She grabbed the cables, pulled, fire, immediate, white-hot, shooting up her left leg, the ankle screaming. She bit her lip, hard enough to taste copper, silencing the gasp before it escaped. She pulled again, hand over hand, 10 feet, her arms shaking. 40 days of starvation had eaten her muscle. There was nothing left, just bone and willpower. 20 feet. The cable swayed. The hull was cold beneath her boots, condensation making everything slick, her fingers burning, the rubber rough against her cracked skin. She didn't look down. Don't look down. Because if she looked down, she would see the Alpha, and the Alpha would become real, and real things had weight, and weight would drag her off this cable and into the mud and into those jaws. And don't look down. 30 feet. Her right hand slipped, the condensation, the sweat, the rubber. Her grip failed. For one sickening instant, she was falling. Her stomach lurched, the world tilted, the safety rope snapped taut. It jerked her violently, slamming her against the hull. Her bad ankle cracked against the steel with a sound that she felt in her spine. A piece of loose plating, dislodged by the impact, broke free. It fell, slowly. In that strange way that disaster always happens slowly when you're watching it. The metal panel tumbled through the air, end over end, catching the gray light, and splashed into the coolant lake below. Sharp, loud, echoing off the hull like a gunshot. The mountain of black muscle shifted, the massive head lifted, 6 glowing yellow eyes, acidic, bright, snapped open. The Alpha looked up. It saw her. Everything happened at once. Gravity disappeared. Seraphina shot upward, yanked by the safety rope. Harkin hauling with everything he had. His face purple, veins standing out on his neck. A strangled roar of effort tearing from his throat. Below her, the Alpha didn't roar. It made a sound like 2 tectonic plates grinding together. a deep vibration that rattled every loose bolt on the freighter's hull. That shook the fluid in her eyes. That turned her bones to tuning forks. The beast lunged upward. It didn't jump, it propelled. All that tonnage, all that muscle, straight up. Jaws the size of an escape pod snapping shut on the empty air where Seraphina had been dangling 1 second before. 1 second. The concussive force of those jaws slamming shut hit her boots like a shockwave. Harkin pulled. She scraped over the lip of the airlock. They tumbled backward onto grated metal floor, tangled in rope and cables. Outside, the Alpha hit the hull. The entire ship shuddered. A deep structural groan, steel bending, the beast's claws raking the plating, searching for purchase, its yellow eyes glaring through the airlock opening. It couldn't fit. It fell, back into the mud, a thunderous splash of toxic coolant. Harkin slammed his palm onto the manual override. The heavy emergency bulkhead slid shut. Pneumatic hiss, total darkness. Then the red. Emergency lighting. Weak pulsing strobes painting the corridor in bloody intervals. Harkin lay on his back, gasping. "Tell me," he panted, "you didn't just drop a piece of my ship on a sleeping Alpha." Seraphina didn't answer. She was curled on her side, gripping her left leg. The ankle was swollen to twice its size, bruised a deep, sickening purple. The medical tape had burst open. The adrenaline faded. The pain arrived. Cold, paralyzing, absolute. Harkin sat up, looked at her leg. His cynical armor dropped. Just mechanical pragmatism now. He unclipped a thick strap of nylon webbing from his rucksack. "Bite down." "What?" "Your ankle is out of the socket, maybe fractured. You can't walk on it, and I can't carry you while shooting. I have to put it back." He moved to her boot. "Bite the webbing, princess, unless you want every prowler in this ship to hear you scream." She placed the nylon between her teeth, the taste of sweat and dirt and old canvas. She nodded once. Harkin grabbed her heel and calf. He didn't count down, didn't offer comfort. He twisted, shoved upward. White. Everything went white. A sound came out of her that she had never made before, muffled by the webbing, guttural, animal, the sound of a body betraying a mind. The joint popped back into place with a crunch that she felt in her jaw. She collapsed backward onto the grating, trembling, stars exploding behind her eyelids. "Done," Harkin said, already wrapping, splints, tape, tight enough to cut circulation, his hands fast, practiced, the same hands that cleaned gun parts, that fixed engines, that once held a baby named Emmett. "It'll hold your weight for about an hour, maybe less, before the swelling breaks the tape." He pulled her up. She swayed. The corridor spun. She grabbed the wall. "We have to move," he said. The Alpha woke the whole basin, the smaller ones. A metallic screech below, claws on steel grating. "Are already inside." They moved. The interior of the freighter was a nightmare of ruined architecture. Corridors ended in walls of crushed metal. Exposed wiring showered sparks onto the grated floor. The air was thick with smoke and the choking stench of burnt insulation. Seraphina leaned on her pipe. Every step, a negotiation with agony. She counted steps, because counting gave her something to focus on other than the pain. 1, 2, 3, 4, Harkin took point, rifle sweeping every intersection, his headlamp cutting through the red strobe dark. 5, 6, 7. The chittering was everywhere now. Above, below, behind the walls. The prowler packs flooding through the torn hull like water through a broken dam. 8, 9, 10. They reached a stairwell. Heavy blast doors blown off their hinges. Below, the chittering was deafening, shadows darting across the red walls. Too many. "If we go down there," Harkin whispered, "they'll swarm us." "Is there another way?" He scanned, found a heavy grated panel set into the floor near the wall. Ventilation shaft, drops to the primary cooling loop. It'll be tight. He kicked the latch. It snapped. He heaved the grate open. A blast of hot, foul air hit their faces. Seraphina didn't hesitate. She slid into the narrow shaft. The metal was slick, hot. She slid down, fast, too fast, the wall scraping against her shoulders, her ankle hitting a junction point. She bit through the pain, kept sliding. Harkin followed, pulling the grate shut above him, just as a pair of prowlers bounded into the corridor, claws scraping frantically at the metal. They couldn't fit. Not yet. The engineering bay was a cathedral of industrial machinery. Seraphina tumbled out of the ventilation shaft onto a wide grated catwalk. Harkin landed beside her, both breathing hard. The room was massive. In the center stood the ship's primary fusion core, a towering cylinder of dark metal, dead. But the secondary systems around it were still bleeding. Green coolant pooling into a deep sub-level below the catwalks, hissing where it touched exposed wiring, and at the far end of the room, elevated on a control platform, a thick yellow light, pulsing steadily, the beacon. There, Harkin breathed. A rare note of relief, they hurried across the catwalk. Seraphina dragging her leg, the numbness spreading now, terrifying. She couldn't feel her toes. She counted steps anyway. 1, 2, 3. They reached the platform. Harkin dropped his pack, pulled out the pry bar. The beacon was a rectangular box, mounted to the wall, bolted directly to the main frame. Harkin jammed the pry bar behind the casing. Pulled. Metal shrieked. "It's bolted tight," he grunted, adjusting grip. "Watch the door." Seraphina turned. The heavy blast doors at the end of the catwalk were sealed shut. "It is secure. Nothing is secure against those things." He unholstered the slug thrower, held it out, handle first. She took it. The weight almost pulled her arm down. Cold steel, slick with his sweat. "Safety is off. Point the barrel. Squeeze. Don't jerk or you'll miss. The recoil will try to break your nose. Lock your elbows." She raised the gun, locked her elbows, aimed at the blast doors. Behind her, the screech of the pry bar against metal. Harkin throwing his weight. A bolt snapped. Then another. A thud hit the blast doors. Seraphina's finger found the trigger. Another thud. The thick steel dented inward. A fist-shaped bulge appearing in the metal. The chittering on the other side was frenzied. They smelled blood. They smelled heat. They smelled prey. "Work faster," Seraphina said. "I'm working." The doors bulged again, violently. A massive claw punched straight through the reinforced steel, peeled it back like foil, not the small prowlers. "Harkin." Her voice dropped to a dead flat calm, the way voices do when fear overflows and comes out the other side as something cold, something clear. "The Alpha is here." Harkin looked over his shoulder. The color left his face. "It shouldn't be able to fit in the corridors." It did not use the corridors. She could see it now, through the torn door. The beast had burrowed straight through the ship's infrastructure, ripping through bulkheads and walls and floors, leaving a tunnel of destruction behind it, driven by spite and hunger and something ancient that did not tolerate trespassers. The blast doors were ripped off their hinges. The Alpha squeezed through, missing patches of armor. Black blood hissing where it dripped onto the grating. It had forced its way through the ship's skeleton, and it was furious. It saw them. It roared. Not a sound. A force. A physical wall of noise that pushed Seraphina backward, that rattled the catwalk, that made the green coolant below ripple and splash. Behind the Alpha, dozens of smaller prowlers poured through the hole, a tidal wave of gray muscle and teeth, swarming the catwalk. "Shoot!" Harkin yelled, turning back to the beacon, hammering the remaining bolts with his machete. Seraphina fired. The gun exploded in her hands. That was what it felt like. The recoil slammed her shoulder backward. The boom deafened everything. Shell casing the size of her thumb ejecting, clattering on the grate. The heavy slug caught a prowler mid-leap, tore it in half, shredded the two behind it. She recovered. She didn't blink. She didn't think. She fired again and again. Each shot was chaos. Each shot was a thunderclap in a metal cathedral. Each shot turned a prowler into mist and broken bone. But there were too many. They climbed over their dead, scrambling, shrieking, an endless wave. A ruler must be iron, her father's voice, in the dark corners of her mind, echoing off marble pillars that were a universe away. He was wrong. Iron is rigid. Iron shatters under enough pressure. She had watched her father become iron. She had watched iron destroy everything it touched. She needed to be something else. Click. The gun was empty. The swarm was 20 feet away. The alpha right behind them. Its yellow eyes locked on her, glowing in the red emergency light like small, hateful suns. Harkin. She dropped the gun, drew her knife. The same knife the guard had pressed into her palm 44 days ago. The only thing she had been given. By the only person who showed her mercy. Got it. Harkin ripped the beacon free, a shower of blue sparks raining from the console. He clutched the heavy rectangular box to his chest and slammed a button on its side. A high-pitched piercing frequency filled the air. Cutting through the roars, the beacon was active. "We need an exit," Seraphina screamed. The swarm was 15 feet away. 10. The alpha pushed past them, shoved its own pack aside, focused entirely on the two small creatures that had dared to enter its domain. Harkin looked around wildly. The reactor. The manual cooling vents are above us. Emergency ladder. We climb. I blow the secondary core. The blast goes up the maintenance shaft, takes us with it. Blow the core. Localize fusion overload. Vaporizes this deck and everything on it, including us. Not if we're above it, in the shaft. The blast baffles will absorb the thermal energy. We ride the pressure wave up, like a cork in a bottle. That is insane. You got a better idea. The alpha was on the catwalk now. It filled the entire width, its claws gouging grooves in the steel grating, its yellow eyes fixed, patient, the eyes of something that had never lost a hunt. "Move," Harkin shouted. He grabbed her by the harness of her cloak, physically threw her toward the emergency ladder bolted to the wall beside the platform. Seraphina hit the rungs. Her ankle was gone. She couldn't feel it anymore, which was either very bad or temporarily useful. She chose temporarily useful, hauled herself up, rung by rung, the metal cold against her burning palms. Below her, a prowler lunged at Harkin. He swung the heavy beacon like a club. It connected with the beast's skull. A wet crunch. The prowler dropped. He ducked under another set of jaws, grabbed the ladder, climbed behind her. The alpha reached the platform. It reared up, massive jaw gaping. The smell of it, decay and heat and something acidic that burned the inside of her nose. Its teeth snapped shut inches from Harkin's boots. I didn't flinch. He reached into his chest rig, pulled out his last flare, cracked it. The red light blazed. Below them, the console he had ripped the beacon from. He had severed the coolant regulators deliberately. She understood that now. The sparking wires, the leaking fluid. He had set the stage before they even started running. He had planned this. "Eat this," Harkin snarled down at the alpha. "You ugly bastard." He dropped the burning flare into the exposed fusion core. "Climb," he screamed. Seraphina climbed into the vertical maintenance shaft. Dark, narrow, the metal walls pressing in on both sides. Rungs slick with condensation. Harkin was right behind her. She could hear his breathing, ragged, desperate, his boots clanging on the rungs. Below them, light, not fire, Not orange, not red, white. Pure, blinding, silent white. The kind of light that has no color because it is all colors at once. The kind of light that existed at the beginning of the universe before anything had a name. The engineering bay imploded. The fusion overload collapsed inward first, sucking the air out of the room with a physical vacuum that pulled at Seraphina's legs. Then it reversed. The shock wave came up the shaft. Sound ceased to exist, replaced by a pressure so enormous it was beyond hearing, beyond feeling. It was simply everything, all at once. The blast caught them, hurled them upward, through the shaft, through the dark, like leaves in a hurricane. Seraphina's feet left the rungs, her back hit the wall, her elbows hit metal, her world became a spinning, violent tunnel of heat and force and the taste of ozone. But the heavy blast baffles built into the shaft, designed for exactly this kind of emergency. They absorbed the thermal energy. The fire couldn't reach them. Just the force, just the push. They were launched from the top of the vent, into the air, into the gray, misty sky of the Ashwood Basin, weightless, for one impossible second. Then gravity remembered its job. They hit the mud, hard, rolling down the side of the ridge. Seraphina's world became a tumbling mess of sky and earth and pain. Her pipe was gone, her knife somehow still in her grip, her hands locked around it with a force she didn't know she had. Behind them, the freighter groaned, one final time, a massive dying sound, like a whale singing its last note. A plume of blue flame and black smoke shot hundreds of feet into the air from the center of the wreck. The earth shook. Then slowly, the great ship settled into its grave, completely gutted. Silence. Not the silence of the forest. Not the watchful, predatory silence of the basin. Real silence. The silence that comes after everything is over. Seraphina lay in the mud. She couldn't hear anything. The explosion had blown out her eardrums. A high-pitched ringing was the only sound left in the world. She opened her eyes. Gray mist, clinging to the ground like a shroud. The sky above was bruised purple, fading toward evening. She turned her head. Harkin was not beside her. She sat up, the mud sucking at her cloak, her body screaming from 100 different injuries. She couldn't feel her left leg below the knee. She looked around. The ridge, the smoking ruin of the freighter, the green lake now boiling, sending columns of toxic steam into the air. No Harkin. Her chest tightened. Harkin. She couldn't hear her own voice, just the ringing. She looked at her hands. She was holding the beacon. She didn't remember grabbing it. But there it was, heavy, rectangular, battered and dented, its yellow light pulsing steadily against the mist. He had given it to her, at the top of the ladder. She remembered now, his hands shoving it against her chest. The look in his eyes, not fear, not goodbye, something resolved. Take this, he had said. Keep climbing. And she had, and the blast had taken them both, and she had landed on the ridge. And he, where? She tried to stand. Her ankle collapsed. She fell, mud splashing against her face. No, no, no. She crawled, dragging the beacon, dragging her useless leg, looking, scanning the mud, the rocks, the debris scattered across the ridge. He told her to leave him. On the ridge that morning, before the climb, he told her, "If I fall, don't catch me." And she had said, "Stop telling me to leave you behind." And now she stopped crawling because she heard something, not with her ears. Her ears were gone, but through her hands, through the mud, a vibration, footsteps, heavy, uneven, dragging. She turned, a shape in the mist, moving toward her from the eastern slope, limping badly, one arm hanging at a wrong angle, Flight suit scorched black, face coated in ash and grime and something dark that might be blood. Harkin. I emerged from the mist like a ghost, like something the forest tried to swallow and couldn't quite digest. His face was gray, his left arm was broken. She could see the angle, ribs too, from the way he held his torso, hunched, protective, each breath a visible effort. But he was standing. He was alive. He had found the secondary hatch, the mid-deck emergency exit, the one she had spotted through the binoculars, the one he had made her memorize that morning. He hadn't stayed behind to die. He had pushed her up the main shaft, and then he had taken the other way, the planned way, the way he had always intended to use, if the math went bad. He hadn't told her, because she would have argued. She would have insisted they go together. She would have wasted time, and time was the one thing they didn't have. So he did what he always did. He made the calculation, he split the variables, and he gave her the better odds without telling her she was getting them. Stubborn, cynical, beautiful arithmetic. He reached her, looked down at her in the mud, then at the beacon in her hands, its yellow light pulsing against both their faces. He tried to grin, managed about half, his split lip bleeding. "I'm too old," he rasped, "to die a hero." Seraphina's hearing was starting to return, muffled, distant, like listening through water. But she heard him, the gravel of his voice cutting through the ringing. She wanted to hit him. She wanted to scream at him, for making her think he was gone, for making her crawl through the mud with a dead leg looking for his body. Instead, she laughed. It came out broken, raspy, completely lacking in royal dignity. It was the sound of a person who had been squeezed through a tube of fire and come out the other side and discovered that the other side was just more mud. Harkin sank down beside her, groaning, his good hand pressing against his ribs. "Beacon's active," he said, looking at the pulsing yellow light. "Signal's punching through. If there's anyone within 3 systems, they'll hear it." "How long?" "Hours, maybe, if we're lucky." Lucky. She looked at him, this battered, broken, impossible man. "I thought you were dead." "I know. Don't ever do that again." "No promises, princess." They sat on the ridge for hours. Harkin bandaged her ankle with what was left of his medical supplies. She set his broken arm using the pipe and strips of his flight suit as a splint. Neither of them were gentle. Neither of them complained. They shared the last canteen of water, passing it back and forth. The iodine taste almost comforting now. Familiar. They didn't speak much. They didn't need to. The transaction was complete. Had been complete for a while now. What remained was something that didn't have a name in either of their languages. Something that existed in the space between two people who had kept each other alive. Not because of math, not because of efficiency, just because. As the sky darkened toward its familiar bruised purple, the mist above them swirled, violently. A low hum filled the air. Anti-gravity thrusters, pushing the fog aside. A ship descended, blocky, ugly, utilitarian, patched together from 3 different hull designs. Welded seams visible even from below. A working vessel, not built for beauty, built for function. A scavenger ship. It hovered over the ridge, a harsh white spotlight pinning them in place. The side door slid open. A human, grease-stained mechanic's jumpsuit, holding a loud hailer. "Identify yourselves," the voice booming. "We picked up a guild distress signal." Harkin pushed himself up, slowly, every joint protesting audibly. He looked down at Seraphina. He offered his hand. Seraphina looked at it, covered in dirt, dried blood, grease, engine oil, cracked knuckles, broken nails. The hand of a man who had built things and broken things and lost things and kept going anyway. The opposite of every manicured, perfumed hand she had ever been offered in the high court. It was the most honest hand she had ever seen. She gripped his forearm. He pulled her up. She leaned on him, refusing to show weakness to the ship above. Her left leg useless, his left arm hanging. Together they formed one functional person. "Name's Harkin," he yelled up. "Former pilot, Tyro Basque Guild, retired." He looked at Seraphina, a smirk at the corner of his mouth. "And this is Princess Seraphina. She's looking for a ride out of this mud pit." The man in the ship paused. "A princess out here. Long story, you got medical supplies, hot food. We got rations. Then throw down a ramp. We're coming aboard." The ramp lowered with a mechanical whine, slamming into the mud. They limped toward it, together. Two broken people holding each other up, moving slowly, one step at a time. The warm light from the open hatch falling over them like morning. Seraphina stopped at the bottom of the ramp. She looked back, over her shoulder, at the Ashwood Basin, the endless ocean of black trees, the toxic blue moss, the smoking ruin of the freighter, the green lake, the mist, 44 days. In this place she had eaten dirt and slept in hollows and killed animals with a knife and nearly died more times than she could count. In this place she had found bones of her father's victims, had faced the truth about the man who raised her, had carried a stranger through a fever, had been carried in return. In this place she had become something new. She turned back to the ramp, took one step, then another. They were halfway up when the scavenger ship's comm system crackled. The captain, a grizzled woman with short gray hair and oil-stained hands, appeared in the hatchway. "We've got a problem." Harkin tensed. "What kind? Your beacon didn't just reach us. There's another ship, incoming from the north. Fast, military grade." She held up a scanner. The display showed two signatures, their scavenger vessel and a second contact, closing rapidly. "It's Oak Haven," the captain said. "Royal Registry, single vessel, no fleet escort. They're hailing us." Seraphina's blood went cold. She knew, before the captain said anything else. She knew who was on that ship. "Put it through," Seraphina said, her voice steady, calm in the way that only comes from having already faced the worst. The captain looked at Harkin. Harkin nodded. A screen flickered to life on the bulkhead wall of the cargo bay. And there he was, King Aldrich. He looked old. That was the first thing she noticed. He looked old in a way that had nothing to do with years. His silver-white hair was still pulled back tight, his posture still rigid, his jaw still set. But his eyes were wrong. They were hollow, dark-ringed, the eyes of a man who had not slept, who had been somewhere terrible inside his own head and couldn't find the way out. I was alone. No generals behind him, no guild representatives, no courtiers in layered silks, just the king, in a simple gray tunic, sitting in the pilot's chair of a royal shuttle. Alone. He had come alone. Seraphina. Her name in his voice. She hadn't heard it in 44 days. It hit her like a physical blow, because his voice cracked on the last syllable. Just barely. A fracture so small that no one in the high court would have heard it. But she heard it. "Father." Silence. On the screen. Aldrich's jaw worked, as if he were chewing on words that wouldn't form properly. "I received the distress signal. The frequency matched a guild beacon. I did not expect—" He stopped. "I thought you were dead." Seraphina stood at the bottom of the ramp, looking up at the screen, mud on her boots, blood on her hands, a knife on her hip, a man with a broken arm standing beside her. "You wanted me dead. I wanted you strong. They are not the same thing, Father, and you know it." Aldrich closed his eyes. 1 second, 2. When he opened them, the mask had slipped, just enough. "I found Lord Veshon's bones," Seraphina said. in the forest, and the others. Over 10 years of bones. Father, over 10 years of people you sent into that forest to disappear. The king said nothing. Counselors, officers, lords who disagreed with you, people who had the courage to say no, you didn't exile them, you executed them. Quietly, cleanly, no public outcry, no martyrs, just people who went into the woods and never came back. Still nothing. Like me. The tradition. There is no tradition. Seraphina's voice broke. For the first time, the mask cracking, everything beneath it rushing to the surface. 44 days of cold and pain and betrayal pouring out in 3 words. She pulled it back, breathed, controlled. There is no tradition, she repeated. Quieter now. There is only a man who lost his wife, who watched mercy kill the person he loved most, and who decided that he would never allow mercy to exist again. Not in his court, not in his kingdom, not in his own daughter. Aldrich's face didn't change, but his hand, his right hand, resting on the arm of the pilot's chair, was trembling. You're right, he said. 2 words. Seraphina blinked. In 24 years, she had never heard her father say those words. Not to anyone, not once. Ilara would be... His voice broke, completely. He turned his face away from the camera, his jaw tight, fighting something enormous. When he turned back, his eyes were wet. She would be ashamed of what I have become. Seraphina's throat closed, because there he was, beneath the iron, beneath the cruelty and the fear and the 12 years of brutality. There was the man who held his dead wife on the floor of the audience chamber for 3 hours. There was the father who told bedtime stories, who laughed at bad jokes, who let a little girl sit on his lap during council meetings. He wasn't dead. He was buried, under the same kind of armor that the Alpha Prowler wore. Calcified, thick, grown over years of pain, designed to make him invulnerable, but really just making him alone. I am not coming home to forgive you, Seraphina said. Clear, steady. I may never forgive you. What you did to me, what you did to Veshon, to all of them, that cannot be undone with a confession. I know. I am coming home to fix what you broke, to dismantle the machinery of fear, to rebuild the court on something other than silence and obedience. You will face resistance. I have faced prowlers, and acid, and a man who tried to blow himself up because he was too stubborn to die. I think I can handle bureaucrats. Beside her, Harkin made a small sound, almost a laugh. Aldrich looked at the human, for the first time, his eyes narrowing. Who is this? His name is Harkin, Seraphina said. He is a pilot, a mechanic, a smuggler, and the only person in this galaxy who stood beside me when it mattered. Aldrich stared at the human, the king, looking at the commoner, the Oak Haven, looking at the species he had called cockroaches. Harkin stared back, pale blue eyes, flat, unimpressed. A man who had melted a director's yacht and stolen a freighter and survived a fusion explosion. He wasn't going to be intimidated by a face on a screen. Your daughter saved 30,000 people, Harkin said, and you threw her in a forest to die. With all due respect, Your Majesty, you're a damn fool. Silence. Aldrich should have been furious. A commoner, an alien, speaking to the king that way, in the high court. It would have meant death. But they weren't in the high court. They were in the mud, and the mud had different rules. Perhaps I am, Aldrich said, quietly. He looked back at his daughter for a long moment, the comlink humming between them. A father and a daughter separated by a screen and 1,000 miles of forest and 12 years of grief that had calcified into something monstrous. You look like your mother, he said. The words landed softly, like the last leaf falling from a branch in autumn. Seraphina's vision blurred. She blinked, hard, forced the tears back. Then help me, she said, or stand aside. Aldrich held her gaze, seconds stretched, the weight of everything between them, every decision, every silence, every bone in the forest. He reached for the comm controls on his shuttle. I will return to Valdris. I will convene the High Court. He paused. I will not stand in your way. He didn't say he was sorry. He didn't say he loved her. He didn't say any of the things that fathers are supposed to say and so rarely do. But his hand, as it reached for the controls, was still trembling, and just before the screen went dark, he looked at her one last time. Come home, Seraphina. The screen went black. The scavenger ship's engines hummed, the ramp retracted, the hatch sealed. Seraphina stood in the cargo bay, the warm air wrapping around her like a blanket. The captain handed her a cup of something hot. She didn't ask what it was, she just drank. Harkin sat on a cargo crate, a medic wrapping his arm properly. He winced, but quietly. Through the small porthole, Seraphina watched the ashwood basin shrink, the black trees becoming a dark carpet, the smoking ruin becoming a smudge, then a dot, then nothing. Gone. Harkin appeared beside her, his arm in a proper sling, a cup of something in his good hand. Hey, princess. She looked at him. What happens next? She thought about the question, for the first time. Not about survival, not about the next meal or the next predator or the next impossible climb. What happens next? I go home, she said. I stand in the High Court, in front of the generals and the lords and the guild representatives, and I tell them the truth about the forest, about the bones, about what this kingdom has become. And if they don't listen, then I tell them again and again until they do, or until they send me back to the forest, in which case. She looked at him. I will need a guide. Harkin snorted, that short, sharp sound. I'm retired. You're a fugitive. Retired fugitive. She almost smiled. Almost. Come with me. The words surprised her. She hadn't planned to say them, but there they were, hanging in the recycled air of the cargo bay, between two people who had been strangers 4 days ago and were now something else entirely. Harkin looked at her, his pale blue eyes, the lines around them, the weight of 10 years of running, of Emmett, of the wrench, of the unanswered call. Why? Because you are honest, because you see through pretense, because every court needs someone who will tell the truth even when the truth is uncomfortable. She paused. And because I do not want to walk into that hall alone. Harkin was quiet for a long time. He looked out the porthole, at the stars emerging from behind the atmosphere. Bright, scattered, each one a light, each light a life. Your mother, he said, she used to say that, about the lights. You told me. Yes, Emmett would have liked her. The gentleness of it, the way he connected his son to her mother, two people who never met, bridged by the two people they left behind. He would have, Seraphina agreed. Harkin drained his cup, set it down on the cargo crate. I'm not a politician. I'm not a diplomat. I'm a mechanic who stole a ship and punches above his weight. I am not asking you to be a politician. What are you asking? I am asking you to stand beside me, the way you stood beside me in the forest. He looked at her, one last calculation behind those tired blue eyes. Not the math of survival this time. Something that required a different kind of courage than facing prowlers and acid and explosions. The courage to stop running. All right, princess. He said it quietly, without fanfare, without drama. Just a man making a decision in a cargo bay. But I'm not wearing a damn tiara. I would not dream of it. The scavenger ship broke atmosphere. The stars multiplied, filling the porthole with scattered light. Thousands of them, millions, each one a name, each one a life. Her father had said the wilderness would shatter her, or forge her into iron. iron. He had been half right. The wilderness had shattered the girl who stepped off the dropship 44 days ago. The pampered princess, the idealistic daughter, the woman who believed that standing up in a marble hall was the bravest thing she would ever do. That girl was gone. But what replaced her was not iron. Iron was her father's weapon. Iron was rigid, brittle. It held its shape until the pressure exceeded its limits, and then it shattered, spectacularly, taking everything around it down. She was not iron, she was alloy, stronger, more flexible, forged in a fire that her father could never understand. A fire made of mud and starvation and dead men's bones, and a human pilot who couldn't save his son but refused to stop trying to save someone. Alloy doesn't shatter. It bends. It absorbs. It adapts. And it never, ever breaks. Harkin. He looked up. It is time to go back. I have a court to dismantle. He stood, slowly, knees cracking. Yeah, he said. I figured. And the stars burned on, one by one, each one a light, each light a life. And Seraphina, of the Oak Haven, survivor of the Ashwood Basin, daughter of a broken king, walked